Dallas Love Field was the main airport through most of the first half of the 20th century. Even after a failed attempt to build a regional airport with Fort Worth, Love Field would thrive even if Fort Worth would continue to build that new airport. However, when DFW Regional Airport opened for commercial service in 1974, Love Field didn't close, as most of its passenger traffic was required to move out of the airport. What's going on, everyone? My name's School Titanium 68, and in today's aviation video, we're going to answer the question, why does Love Field still exist and thrive? But first, let's roll the intro. Now, before we continue on, if you guys are hearing like some sort of background noise, my answer is I'm very sorry. I am recording this while my parents are watching a movie. Yeah, my sister's home, so I'm kind of just like, there's not much I can really do about that. But, henceforth, let's go a little bit into the history of Love Field, which will explain why Love Field still exists. So, Dallas Love Field is a city-owned airport located in the neighborhood of Love Field, which is about 6 miles northwest of downtown Dallas. Again, for decades, this was the main airport for the city of Dallas until the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport opened for commercial service on January 13th, 1974. The airport currently has 20 gates with 2 parallel runways sitting on about 1,300 acres and is the birthplace, corporate headquarters, and main operating base for Southwest. As I like to say, actions and decisions of the past have led us to where we are today. Now let's take a dive into the history of how Love Field came to where it is today. Now, Love Field's origins date back to 1917. At this time, the U.S. Army announced that it would establish a series of camps to train new pilots as they had just entered into World War I. This would be one of 32 such Army bases that would be built. And at the time, the airfield would be built just southeast of Batchman Lake, covering about 700 acres and accommodating up to 1,000 personnel. Now, Love Field itself would teach primary flight training for new recruits that would last 8 weeks, and then after those 8 weeks, pilots would then be transferred to another station to learn advanced flight training. Now, the first unit that was stationed at Love Field would be the 136th Aero Squadron that was transferred from Kelly Field in San Antonio. Other squadrons assigned to Love Field include the 71st, 121st, and the 197th Aero Squadron. And after the end of World War I, all of 4 squadrons would be consolidated into the Flight School Detachment. Now, the 156th Aero Squadron was formerly at Love Field was moved to Love Field in 1918 as a repair and maintenance support unit for the JN-4 aircraft, which are the main aircraft that were used for basic training for flight, for pilots. Back in 1919, it was later then demobilized. Now, after World War I, Love Field was deactivated as an active military airfield and would become a storage facility for surplus de Havilland and JN-4 aircraft. Now, some of these JN-4 aircraft were bought out by the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Company and were then used for other reasons. Another notable event that happened at Love Field at the time became known as the largest recruiting mission in the spring and summer of 1919. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Henry B. Claggett would depart with 7 of de Havilland's DH-4s and would fly as far as Boston. Through the first half of the 20s, the airport would support other smaller military units until about 1923. And at that point, the military budget was significantly cut down as they made the decision to dismantle the remaining buildings at Love Field and sell it as surplus. The War Department still owned the land, but would then lease it to ranchers and farmers. About 5 years later, in 1928, the city of Dallas would purchase the land at Love Field and would open the aircraft for civilian use, with the first passenger service being done by the National Air Transport Company. On April 9th, 1932, the first paved runway was complete, and by 1939, there were 21 weekly flights departing Love Field. 9 from American, 8 from Braniff, 4 from Delta. And by 1940, the Lemon Avenue Terminal building opened on the east side of the terminal. Now, through World War II, Love Field would yet again become one of 9 civil detachment schools. Providing basic training like it did during World War I, pilots are primarily trained with the Fairchild PT-19s, as well as some PT-17 Steermas and P-40 Warhawks that were also assigned to Love Field. Also stationed at Love Field during the wartime was an Air Material Command Modification Center. In 1942, that command was transferred to Hensley Field. Well, it was transferred from Hensley Field to Love Field. Now, for those of you that don't know where Hensley Field is, This is right off of, I believe it's I-30, west of Dallas. I think it's I-30. If it's not I-30, it's I-20. Okay. So it's kind of on the southwest side of downtown Dallas. Let me bring that back up here. So this is what used to be Hensley Field. This was also another military base that was used in wartime. I mean, there was probably like 7 or 8 military bases that were used in the war. There was another one in Arlington, not where Arlington Municipal is, but it was somewhere there. You got the JRB Naval Base on the west side of Fort Worth, and at that time, Love Field would also be one of those training forces. Now, in September 1943, a new north to south runway known as runway 1836 was completed, as well as the northwest to southeast runway 1331. When the war ended, all military facilities were shut down, with the Gulf Coast Air Traffic, the ACTC, so the school moving to Brady, Texas. And that was what the flight training school was named during World War II. Now, post-World War II was mostly about Love Field establishing itself as the main commercial airport for Dallas, as well as being one of the busiest in the state of Texas. In 1950, Pioneer Airlines would move its base in Houston to Love Field just 3 years before the opening of Amon Carter Field, later renamed to Greater Southwest International, like we talked about last week. As we discussed last week, GSW was made as an attempt to build a joint regional airport for DFW, for Dallas and Fort Worth. But Dallas ultimately pulled out when they found out that the terminal building would be closer to Fort Worth rather than it being equidistant to each city. Now, after the opening of Greater Southwest on June 1st, 1954, runway 725 was closed in anticipation for terminal expansion. Now, at this point, this allowed for Love Field to use 2 runways, runway 13 and runway 18. By 57, there were 52 weekday departures from Braniff alone, 45 from American, 25 from Delta, and 21 from Trans-Texas, which would later be named to Texas International Airlines, 12 from Central Airlines, and then 9 from Continental. Now, entering into the jet age, Love Field would open a brand new terminal gate on January 20th, 1958. This came with 3 one-story concourses, 26 air stair gates, and the world's first airport moving walkway. The airport lines that served Love Field were American, then based in New York City, Braniff, which was based out in Dallas, Central Airlines, which was based in Fort Worth, LA-based Continental, Atlanta-based Delta, and Houston-based Trans-Texas Airways. Actual jet service began on July 12, 1959, when Americans started utilizing the 707 between Love Field and New York. By 1963, Love Field had direct, no change of plane service to London and Frankfurt in collaboration with Braniff and Pan American, with an intermediate stop at O'Hare, mainly for like refueling and that stuff. Now, 2 years later, in 1965, the second parallel runway, 13R31L, opened after a lot of legal wrangling. The main concerns for that was just its proximity to schools and its minimal safety areas, while nearby residents attempted to stop the anticipated increase in noise. Now, several terminal expansion programs went on through the early 60s due to the boom. American would expand its concourse in 1968, with Braniff opening the Terminal of the Future that same year. Braniff's terminal would feature several new innovations, including the first rotunda concourse and jet bridges, among others. And this terminal would connect to the new jet rail monorail in 1970. Texas International would expand their concourse in 1969, with Delta expanding then a year later in 1970. Now in 72, by that point, American would utilize 14 gates on the west end. Delta would use 13 gates. Braniff and Ozark would share 13 gates on the east end, and then Texas International would use 7. Now, through the early 70s, both Braniff and Delta were using their 747-100s at Love Field, with Braniff flying the 747 nonstop to Honolulu, and Delta flying it nonstop to LA, as well as its big hub in Atlanta. Now, again, as I discussed in last week's video about the rise and fall of Greater Southwest, by 1964, the Civil Aeronautics Board got tired of funding 2 competing airports in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and required both cities to plan for a regional airport within 180 days. They finalized the plan within a few months, and in 1968, they finalized the location of the current Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport and restrict air travel at their respective municipal airports to promote the new facility. All carriers then that were then operating at Love Field, which included American, Braniff, Delta, Continental, Eastern, Frontier, and Ozark. Because remember, Pioneer actually merged with Frontier, so that's why. And then, as well as Texas International, they all agreed to shift all aircraft operations to the new airport when it opened for commercial service in early 1974. And there was a whole agreement. All airlines had to sign it. And at that point, that would have been it. At least it should have. Love Field would have been used for general aviation purposes, just like what Greater Southwest was relegated to when all passengers traffic cuts service to Greater Southwest. But it didn't happen. Now we're kind of get to see is the reason why. And honestly, it kind of existed because of Southwest. Now, in 1971, Southwest received an air operator certificate from the state of Texas to operate from any airport in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. From here, they would begin quick flights between Love Field, Houston, and San Antonio. You might think, shouldn't they have moved to DFW Airport when it opened? And to be honest, you're also right, but a little bit wrong too. You see, Southwest never signed that 1968 regional airport agreement. The other airlines who agreed to move out of Love Field and relocate passenger traffic to DFW Airport felt threatened by the fact that Southwest still operated out of Love Field, even when everyone moved out. They felt that Dallas residents would find the long commute to DFW Airport inconvenient and contrary to that notion of a quick trip. The cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, along with the DFW Regional Airport Board, sued Southwest, arguing that the 1968 agreement gave them the authority to force Southwest to fly from Denver. Well, from DFW, sorry, not Denver. However, the courts decided to side with Southwest as long as Love Field remained open as an airport. Now, the year before DFW Airport opened, Love Field saw a then record number of enplanements at just under 6.7 million and was the 8th busiest airport in the U.S. At this point, the airport had more than 70 gates and saw frequent 747 service. In 1974, when DFW Airport opened, almost all passenger service ended at Love Field, with Greater Southwest being demolished due to its proximity to DFW Airport. With only 467,000 enplanements in 1975, the city of Dallas decided to decommission several of its concourses. What they did with some of these dormant concourses is that the city of Dallas leased them to a guy named Wesley Groyer. He opened up the Love Entertainment Complex a year after everyone moved out in 1975. What he did is he converted some of the airport's dormant concourses and the main lobby of one of the former terminals into movie theaters, an ice rink, roller rink, huge video arcades, restaurants, and a bowling alley. Within the first 2 weeks, this complex saw up to 800 people on the weekdays and up to 4,000 people on the weekdays. Again, this vastly exceeded Goya's expectations, leading to a great first year of opening. However, the next year saw a drastic dip in attendance and would lead to its eventual closing in May of 1978. Leading into 1978, for those of you that aren't big aviation nerds like I am, 1978 was a humongous year for the airline industry. Before 1978, everything was regulated by the federal government. So if you wanted to get a new route, you had to get it through the federal government. Well, now, in 1978, the federal government decided, hey, we're not going to be regulating the industry anymore. We're going to leave it to the FAA. And I don't know if the Civil Aeronautics Board was still there, but the FAA was now in charge of the U.S. airline industry. Now, with this deregulation of the airline industry, Southwest decided to take advantage of this and plan for interstate travel from Love Field in the year 1979. Now, mind y'all, before that, Southwest had strictly said that they were only going to fly intrastate. So the difference between interstate and intrastate is where you're going between like another state. So that's why we have the different interstate highways. So we've got like I-10, which runs through multiple states. But intrastate travel is like, let's say, taking a Texas highway. So like any state highways, that's technically considered intrastate travel. Think of it like that when you're also thinking about like highways and stuff. However, federal regulators actually strongly supported Southwest's plan for expansion, but local regulators heavily opposed this plan, and this was for a good reason. Again, DFW Airport had opened in 1974, and with Southwest wanting to expand to interstate travel, local leaders were worried that Love Field would choke DFW Airport and hamper that new airport from expanding and would lead to the possible closing of the massive DFW airports. Now, to protect DFW Airport from significant competition at Love Field, Fort Worth-based U.S. Representative Jim Wright pushed a law through Congress called the Wright Amendment. This restricted passenger service at Love Field in the following ways. So, passenger service on regular, mid-sized, and large aircraft could only be provided from Love Field to locations within Texas and then the 4 neighboring states in the United States. So that's Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and New Mexico. So they only had 5 states at the time that they couldn't fly into. That they could only fly to. Sorry. Airlines could not offer connecting flights through any sort of service or another airline or through ticketing beyond the 5-state region. So what that means is if you're flying out of Love Field, you could only fly to, let's say, into Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, or Louisiana, and the airline that would fly in with that could not give you another ticket to another airport at another place. Now, also, you couldn't fly to anything outside of those 5 states. You also couldn't do connecting flights, like, let's say, like with some other places. I know with some airlines, there are things where they don't fly, where one airline doesn't fly to a specific destination that you have. So you'll fly into, like, maybe the regional hub, like, let's say for Delta, you'll fly into Atlanta, and then you'll fly into wherever. That's a connecting flight. But at Love Field, that was not allowed. And then the other thing that wasn't allowed is, technically long-haul service was allowed. But if you're going to do that to any other state outside of those 5 states, the aircraft had to have 56 or fewer passenger seats. Now, this new amendment dissuaded a lot of the major carriers from starting service out of Love Field, freeing Southwest from direct competition of Love Field, and allowed for Southwest to build its Love Field operation. Now, Southwest's co-founder, Lamar Muse, started another company called Muse Air, which would start short-haul flights to and from Love Field in Houston using McDonnell Douglas DC-9s as well as MD-80s starting in 1982. Ultimately, it was deemed unprofitable for this route, and the airline was bought out by Southwest in 1985, and the brand was shut down in 1987. The same year that Muse Air was bought out by Southwest, so in 1987, Continental Airlines proposed to fly out of Love Field. This led to years of courts battle over the interpretation of the Wright Amendment, as DFW Airport in Fort Worth sought to prevent expansion at Love Field. Ultimately, this led to a US DOT ruling that the Wright Amendment only prevented through ticketing specific flight segments to or from Love Field. Now, for those of y'all, again, wondering what through ticketing is, it's a system where a traveler who is using multiple transport networks can purchase a single ticket for the entire journey. So what that means is kind of like, let's say you're gonna buy one ticket with American, but you still have to but you're gonna fly to like a country that uses, let's say, one of the One World Alliance partners, which has multiple other different things. But let me give you an example of this. Let's say you bought a Qatar Airways ticket to fly to Doha, but the airport that you live at doesn't offer direct flights to Doha. So what through ticketing does, it allows you to board on an available American airline flight to a more local hub that would fly to Doha. So let's say like DFW Airport. And then from there, you could take the next Qatar Airways flight to Doha without having to pay for 2 separate tickets. I mean, American does it all the time, especially on some of their more popular routes. They'll sometimes bunch in like 2 or 3 separate airlines in the same flight, so that A, those flights are full, but also B, for the connecting flights, if you're flying into Terminal D, you can just go to the next gate. Now, with the interpretation classified by the US DOT, the act of double ticketing, or selling passengers a separate ticket on a connecting flight at another airport, was legal if that second ticket was not offered until the traveler asked for it. This also further helps Southwest in that if you flew out of Love Field, again, you could fly to any airport in the 5-state region, technically change planes, and fly to anywhere else in the country on a separate ticket to any other city that Southwest served. Now, In the early 90s, a faction led by Dallas City Councilman Jerry Bartos lobbied for the repeal of the Wright Amendment, but again was soon mired in lawsuits. Ultimately, the Dallas mayor at the time, Steve Bartlett, halted the repeal after negotiations with Fort Worth. However, in 96, Love-based Legend Airlines said it would operate long-haul flights under the 56-passenger exception using McDonnell Douglas DC-9-30 jets modified in a 56 all-business class configuration. However, the U.S. DOT ruled in September of that year that the 56-seat restriction applied to the, well, quote-unquote, design capacity of an airliner rather than the number of seats installed. Now, during this time, Legend Airlines seek to change the Wright Amendment, allowing them to use the refurbished airliners. Texas Republican Joe Barton got attention to this and was pushing for the U.S. House to change the 56-seat rule. By 1997, Legend CEO and former FAA Administrator T. Alley MacArthur enlisted the help of Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, who proposed an amendment to allow Legend to use the refurbished planes, which was then named the Shelby Amendment. In short, this new amendment also allowed flights out of Love Field to fly to 3 new states, such as Kansas, Mississippi, and Alabama, while also amending the definition of the 56-passenger jets to fly outside of the new 8-state zone to include any aircraft weighing less than 300,000 pounds with 56 or fewer seats. With the House overwhelmingly approving the transportation bill, went through the Senate and was promptly signed into law by President Bill Clinton. However, within a month, lawsuits are already being filed. Fort Worth and Dallas sued each other, with Fort Worth arguing for the upholding of the 1968 bond agreement, and Dallas arguing that it could no longer be enforced. A few months later, American joined Fort Worth in suing Dallas, and McCarter accused American of masterminding Fort Worth's original lawsuit to attain American's goal of stopping Legend. By February of 98, Mesa Airlines, which had begun intrastate service from Meacham Field in 97, had joined Fort Worth's side of the lawsuit, and Southwest Airlines joined the Dallas side of the lawsuit at the behest of Legend. Now, on May 19, 1998, Continental Airlines, again a party to the original 1968 bond agreement, and its regional affiliate Continental Express, sued both Dallas and Fort Worth over their refusal to allow interstate travel at Love Field using 50-seat Embraer ERJ 145s. Which did technically fit under the 56-seat restriction. The lawsuit argued that the city no longer had the authority to block long-haul service that complied with federal law, and this in turn prompted DFW Airport to sue American Airlines to prevent them from likewise operating from Love, even though American denied having plans to expand into Love Field anyways. Also, in turn, McCarter argued that Fort Worth was also violating the bond agreement by allowing Mesa and Federal Express to operate from Meacham, and then in the recently constructed Fort Worth Alliance Airport, respectively. In October 1998, Legend sued Fort Worth, accusing the city of a quote-unquote double standard in its simultaneous support for Alliance and opposition to expansion at Love. However, State District Judge Bob McCoy dismissed the suit later that month on grounds that Legend wasn't a party of the original 1968 bond agreement and thus lacked standing to use. As I keep going, you guys do realize there's a lot of legal troubles that goes on with with Love Field, which is why it's where it's at right now. Like there's so much legal battles that have gone on with just the existence of Love Field and wanting them to actually increase passenger traffic. It's insane. Also in turn, I already did this part. Dallas and Fort Worth's effort to block Continental Express, and on 1998, had pretty much gotten to a stalemate. And on June 11th, 1998, the airline began intrastate flights between Love Field and George Bush Intercontinental, becoming only the third airline to start service at Love Field after the 1968 bond agreements, following Southwest and the defunct Muse Air. On February 10th, 2000, a federal judge lifted an injunction against the airline's proposed interstate service to Cleveland, and the airline announced that service would begin on June 1st of 2000. Almost 2 months after the federal courts dismissed the lawsuits, Legend began the first long-haul service from Love Field since 1974 with a flight to Dulles with a refurbished 56-seat McDonnell Douglas DC-9. They would soon expand their nonstop schedule to LAX, LaGuardia, as well as Vegas. And May 1st, a month before Continental Airlines started their nonstop service to Cleveland, American would then launch a direct challenge to Legend, which is with its first flight out of left field since '74. What American did is they retrofitted Fokker 100s with 56 first-class seats and offered flights to Chicago and LAX. On June 29, 2000, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review a federal appeals court decision allowing long-haul flights from left field, effectively ending the last attempt by Fort Worth, the DFW Airport Board, and American Airlines to stop such flights. Neither side would then also pursue further legal action. With these lawsuits cleared and a few other airlines operating out of left field now, Southwest decided not to add long-haul flights outside the new 8-state zone, citing a lack of demand. Sadly, though, Legend Airlines would only be able to operate these flights until early December 2000, since it couldn't operate these long-haul flights profitably and would be dissolved a few months later. Now, in November of 2004, Southwest announced their active opposition of the Wright Amendment, claiming that the law was anti-competitive and outdated. That next year, Senator Kit Bond of Missouri attached an amendment to a transportation spending bill to exempt his state from the Wright Amendment. Following the passing of the bill, Southwest would start service from left field to St. Louis and Kansas City on December 13, 2005, and later that day, American announced that it would start service from left field to those same Missouri airports on March 2, 2006, along with adding flights from left field to San Antonio and Austin. 2006, a new compromise was reached between American, Southwest, DFW Airport, and the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth to repeal the Wright Amendment with several conditions. The first thing is the ban on nonstop flights outside of the Wright zone, so it's those 8 states, would remain until 2014. Now, through ticketing to domestic airports, which means connecting flights to long-haul destinations, would be allowed immediately. Left field's gate size would be permanently reduced from 32 gates down to 20, and then left field would only handle domestic flights nonstop. Now, in this new agreement, Southwest would be able to operate 16 gates, American would have 2, and then Continental would have 2 gates. U.S. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson led the effort to pass the bill through the Senate, while Representative Kay Granger led a bipartisan Texas House coalition to see the bill pass through the House. President George W. Bush would sign this bill into law on October 13, 2006. Along with the 20-gate cap, left field was prohibited from operating international commercial flights from the airport, and if Southwest begins flights from any other North Texas airport before 2025, it must give up 1 gate at left field. 4 days after President Bush signed the bill, Southwest announced one-stop or connecting service from left field to 25 destinations outside of the Wright zone starting on October 19th. American would also do the same thing before. Now, this does bring up an interesting thing because, as we all probably know, at least the aviation people that live in DFW know, that next year is technically the year that Southwest is going to expand into DFW Airport. When they'll start, I'm not honestly sure. And at this point, with what's been going on with Southwest, I would not be shocked if they decide to put that on hold for the next, couple of years, since they've pretty much had to restructure. And I would say at least until Boeing kind of redoes themselves and is able to bring the MAX 7 into service, that'll be good for them. Henceforth, in 2009, a new plan to modernize left field was announced. This $519 million master plan would replace the current terminals, so that is these 3 terminals, and I'll probably find a much better picture. So this is what it looked like in 2007. And it's pretty much was these gates here, which it was a 32-gate terminal. But by 2009, they had made a new thing that would replace that 32-gate with a new 20-gate concourse with expanded baggage facilities. There was also plans to add a new $250 million people mover system that would directly connect the airport to the Burbank station, which, if I'm correct, the Burbank station is... actually, let me check Google Maps over here, because I think the Burbank station is the one down here close to the airport. Yeah, so there would have been a people mover system that would have connected Love Field itself to the Burbank station down here, which I believe serves the orange and the green lines. So that means you could technically get a direct service pretty much from anywhere from DFW's Terminal A all the way up through to Richardson, or going northward up to Carrollton, which connects you to Denton County Transport, which take you to downtown Denton, going all the way south and east to, well, the Pleasant Grove neighborhood. But instead of doing that, they decided to bring bus services to connect that to the Inwood station, which is a little bit farther down from where the Burbank station is. So it kind of the Inwood station, instead of making a people mover system directly connecting the Burbank station, which by the way is right next to where Southwest's corporate headquarters is. They would connect it down to Inwood, which is just outside of the UT Southwestern, medical campus, which I don't know if I consider this just UT Southwestern, because you got Parkland Health here as well. So this is pretty much like the Dallas Medical District as well for the Inwood station. But if I remember right, there is a separate station for that. Now, 2014 was also another big year for Love Field. On October 13th was the day that the ban on nonstop flights outside of the right zone was lifted, and immediately Southwest added nonstop service to places like Baltimore, Denver, Vegas, Orlando, Washington Reagan, and Chicago Midway. Early that next month, Southwest would then add nonstop flights to Atlanta, Nashville, Fort Lauderdale, LAX, LaGuardia, Phoenix, San Diego, and Orange County in California, as well as Tampa. Now, what's another thing that happened in 2014? It's a merger of two airlines, American and U.S. Airways. Now, because American had two gates at Love Field, American had to give up those two gates in order for the merger with U.S. Airways to be approved by the Department of Justice. Now, at this point, there were three airlines that were interested in these gates. Delta, Southwest, and Virgin America had all expressed interest in these gates, while the Department of Justice indicated that a low-cost carrier should receive these gates. Ultimately, these gates were granted to Virgin America when the right gates were when the right amendment was lifted, and pretty much denying the gates to both Delta and Southwest. Now, 4 years later, Virgin America would then merge with Alaskan Airlines, and those gates rights were transferred to Alaska Airlines. Now, to allow Delta to fly into Love Field, American was subleasing their two gates to Southwest. After being notified that it would have to cease service at Love Field, Delta threatened to sue the city of Dallas. Now, Southwest at that point had agreed a temporary resolution by agreeing to sublease the gate space to Delta until January of 2015. When this agreement expired, United Airlines, which, by the way, Continental had merged with United back in 2012, so the gate rights transferred to United, they had agreed to allow Delta to use one of its gates until July 2015. Now, one of these gates was already subleased to Southwest since United, right around the time the Wright Amendment was about to be lifted, was only operating about 6 daily flights to its hub at George Bush Intercontinental, but would eventually increase it to 12 daily flights. However, United got a better deal in just outright selling their gate rights to Southwest. Now, with all this commotion, the city of Dallas brought a lawsuit against all parties in June 2015 to resolve the gate issue in court. 7 months later, in January of 2016, Delta won a preliminary injunction to continue service at Love Field using Southwest gates. Again, this whole thing had been in courts with until about 2022, so probably about a little over 2.5 years ago from when it is today. What happened is they decided to lease one of their gates with Alaskan Airlines since back in 2019, since pretty much Alaska kind of sort of has been cutting their service to and from Love Field. For example, back in 2019, Alaska was using about 13 daily flights in and out of Love Field versus 2022, where they just had been cut down to 2 to and from Seattle Tacoma. These gates are now, at least one of the gates that Alaska has is going to be subleased to Delta until September of 2028. With that settlement in place, Delta would then expand service beyond Atlanta, adding flights to LA and LaGuardia. However, a month after that announcement, Delta did cut these routes indefinitely, and so far they only offer daily flights to and from their hub in Atlanta. Now, as we wrap this up, y'all have seen pretty much how Love Field went from a World War I training center to where it is now. With the opening of DFW Airport in 1974, this airport should not have been allowed to live, but with Southwest being insistent on flying out of Love Field for intrastate travel, it kept the airport alive. And now with the airport being one of Southwest's main bases operations in the U.S., it is looking to expand into another airport in 2025, DFW Airport. Through many, many, many legal battles and lawsuits, Love Field has been able to coexist with DFW Airport and become a base of operations for Southwest. Now, with Southwest expanding into DFW, and now McKinney National Airport positioning itself to welcome commercial traffic in the next couple of years, the coexistence of Love Field and DFW Airport has shown that In some places, there's some places that, like DFW, there is a big enough warrant to have 2 airports for passenger traffic. And now I would say possibly 3, but that is in the works. I believe McKinney is still planning on working on that. Now, as I've said before, will Southwest expand into DFW? I would probably want to say yes, but like just to be hopeful, because they were planning like almost 24 daily flights out of DFW. But at this point, I would say that they're not going to do that until they can get their finances squared away, and hopefully they can work on what they're going to do now. I mean, if y'all haven't noticed, 2024 has not been a good year for Southwest. They were supposed to get like 100 aircraft, but now they're expecting, I don't even know how much they've gotten this year. I mean, with the machinist strike basically shutting down production for like 2 months, I don't even think they've gotten like maybe 20 aircraft. I'm not sure. But I would probably bet that once they've redesigned like their whole cabins stuff, because now they're supposed to have premium seating and first class, so we'll see how that goes. I think once that's all done, I think that at that point is when they're going to probably talk to DFW Airport about maybe expanding in. At least that's what I think. I haven't heard anything new about that. I don't know if they have suspended flights. Well, suspended their expansion into DFW. Still could do it. Honestly, it probably would be a good thing to do, because technically Southwest is considered a low-cost carrier. But I digress. Pretty much, Love Field has been able to exist because Southwest said, well, we didn't sign that 68 bond agreement, so why don't we just stay here? Well, why can't we just stay here? And now that, well, they can't legally expand Love Field, they're just going to have to expand into another airport. Now, there are plans at Love Field for like a reimagined, well, I would say like a new master plan, where they are going to possibly expand the concourse and maybe relocate some gates into like a separate concourse. Still stick at 20, but they'll take like the outer 2 on the very edges and they'll move them down. That's one of them. But once that's done, we'll make a video on that. But with that, we're going to end this video right here, guys. Thank you so much for watching today's video about why Love Field still exists and how it's actually been able to thrive, even with big boy DFW airports being like, 25-30 minutes away. If you liked what you just watched, hit that like and subscribe button down below. If you don't want to miss any future aviation videos, as well as our automotive and mountain bike content, make sure you guys hit that bell icon so you're notified when the next videos drop. Most of them are going to be at 8 a.m. Not like today, where we're actually posting this on a Saturday. I'm sorry. I just have been kind of procrastinating a little bit. That's my bad. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled content. Hope you all have a great day and a great rest of your weekend. Peace.